Hello everyone, the live stream will start in about 30 seconds. Hello everyone and welcome to Science Live. We're coming to you again from the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky. We're here in the Science Education Lab, and this is the place where we have lots of fun activities for guests and especially high school students with labs that we do for chemistry and biology and fun things. And I'm joined today by someone very special who is a first-time guest for our program, and that is Buddy Davis. You probably all know Buddy Davis from his songs and fun activities. If you've ever been here to the museum, maybe you've done one of his workshops, sculpting dinosaurs and all kinds of fun activities like that. So Buddy's here today, and we're going to be talking about the topic of fossils. So that's our big concept for today, thinking about fossils. And specifically, Buddy's going to teach you how if you found a fossil out in the wild, out in the woods or somewhere, you could actually do this process to extract that file or that fossil in a safe way. I think I got my computer term in there. Extracting a file, extracting a fossil. So Buddy's here to help us work through some of that. So Buddy, why don't you just take a second to tell everybody about some of the things that you do connected with the ministry here and just how you got into dealing with fossils.
All right, well, I first got started. I've been with the ministry about 25 years. Yeah, and 22 years full-time, so I've been right from the beginning of the ministry. But Ken originally hired me because I build life-size dinosaurs. So most of the dinosaurs at the museum, I sculptured them.
Yeah, so especially the dino den that we have upstairs.
That's right.
Most all of those fossils, or all those dinosaur sculptures.
That's right. And then Ken found out that I was a singer-songwriter too, and so I've been writing and singing songs for the ministry for as long. And so I love my job. I got a great job.
God's given you lots of talents, and you get to use them in lots of ways.
So we sometimes do dinosaur digs, teach people how to go out west, and we go in Montana and Colorado and places like that, and we find real dinosaur fossils. And today we're going to show you how, if we find a bone, how we would get it out of the ground by plaster jacking it. That's what I'd like to do today.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to be monitoring the comments, and as you're working through some of these things, we'll have a chance to interact with folks. And if anybody wants to ask questions of Buddy or things that we're doing here, we're going to be talking about fossils. Okay, so fossil is our big science word of the day, and it's not really a big word. It's got just a few letters and 2 syllables. But the idea of a fossil is a lot more than you might think. Fossils come in lots of different varieties. So we would define a fossil as any remains of an animal that has died, that has been buried and turned into stone in some way. Now this is not only bones, but it could be structures like footprints that get left in the mud and then covered up and hardened into rock. It can be the waste, the dung that comes from the animals that have died and gets fossilized. Coprolites, we call those. That's the fancy science word for dinosaur fossilized poop.
That's right.
So a coprolite is, if we find those remains, we can find little burrows of worms and animals inside of rock layers and things. So lots of different things that are fossils. So what we have today is we're going to kind of demonstrate this for you, what this would look like out in the field.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and get started with the process so you can see what's happening, and then we'll let that sit for a second, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that you've done out west.
Sure. Okay? All right. So we're going to be making a mold of this. This is a spike off of a Stegosaurus dinosaur. Okay. Stegosaurus is my favorite dinosaur. I love Stegosaurus.
So where would this spike have been on the animal?
End of its tail.
All right, so it would have those 4 spikes sticking out.
He would, yeah. And they range different lengths. Of course, it depends on the animal, how big that animal was. This would be about the average size that you would find on a tail spike. And this is just the bony core, so if you had all of this all together, it's like your fingernail. It would probably be this much longer.
So there's like a keratin layer that's stretched around there, just like on the horn of a cow or something.
That's right, exactly. So this is what we're doing. We're going to go ahead. I'll get started right now, if that's all right.
Yep.
And we're going to do a plaster jacket. So first thing we do, say, like if we'd be in the field and we'd find this, we'd be working for hours to expose this much of it, because when you first would find it, might just be a tip or sticking out of the ground, and you have to excavate all this around. When you get to this point, say, wow, look what we've got here. This is really cool. We want to take this back to the lab.
So I can just grab my hammer real quick and just bang around it and just rip it out of the ground, right?
No, that's not going to work, Roger.
Why not?
That's just not going to work. And so we got to be a little bit more careful with that. Don't want a hammer. Here's what we do want, is brushes and things like this right here. So that's a little bit safer. And we have some tools right here and stuff that we'd be scraping things away and getting it all ready and prepped up, ready to do the plaster jacket. And so that's what we're going to do right now. So first thing we do after we get this ready is we got to put, before we put the plaster on, it's got to be something that would separate the plaster from the actual fossil itself.
Because if we poured the plaster right on top of there, it would soak down into the pores that are inside the fossil.
And it'd be a nightmare cleaning it up.
Yeah, then you'd have to try and get all that out.
Yep. And so we carry along with us tin foil. You could use plastic. It's just something that would separate. Something like this, or a piece of plastic or anything that would just separate that from what we're going to do here. So this is the way we'd do it in the field. Put this around, and this is going to protect this fossil from when we do the plaster. Okay, and shape it right around here. I need a little bit more. I need to get down here too.
I'll rip off a piece if you want to go ahead and start mixing the plaster.
Okay, then you can go ahead and put that right around this here, Roger, if you don't mind. This is plaster of Paris that I'm pouring right here. Okay, so we take this plaster in, and the thing is, you got to carry all this into the field when you do these dinosaurs, because you can't go to the store and buy these things out in the wilds of Montana.
Nope.
So it's going to take a little bit more than that, I think, for this right here.
All right, we have Ethan checking in with us, and Autumn from Oklahoma, and Luke's back with us again today. Luke's our faithful viewer. Evan from Indiana. And, oh, someone checking in from Northern Ireland watching us do this today. Ethan, age 5, says hi to Buddy and he loves your movies.
Oh, good, good. Makes me happy.
Rebecca, age 12, from New York is watching us. Okay, so plaster is something we can buy at a hardware store somewhere. It's nothing fancy. And basically it's a ground up rock that we are going to add water to and turn into a glue. You can see there, it's probably a little thick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And different plasters work differently too. I mean, and sometimes it sets up right in this.
Too quick for you even to get to spread out. Mm-hmm.
So usually when we're in the fields, I'd be using my hands in this. I'd be really going, yeah, give me a good little bit more water. So I can get this
on that edge
there. That looks pretty good.
So this is a lot of work. It's not just all fun and games when you're out hunting fossils and trying to dig those things up.
The most work is getting it to the site. Carry it in. Mercy, I don't like doing that, but I've done my share of it.
So a lot of times you might be able to take a small vehicle like a 4-wheel ATV vehicle close to the site, but then it's up on a cliff or back in a canyon somewhere where you really can't get the vehicles, and then you've got to pack it all in, and that's a lot of the hard work that goes along with this.
Yep, and it depends. If it's really hot out, depends on the humidity of the day as to how fast this was set up.
Yep.
So I got plenty. I think that's just about right. Now the next thing is I'm going to take some burlap, and the burlap's going to help make this strong. So I'm going to put the burlap in the water and get it soaked up here.
Okay, so that's just a very loose, coarse fabric. Back when I was a kid, we'd keep potatoes stored in those things. Growing up in Idaho, we'd have big old burlap bags full of potatoes. So we want to get those nice and soaked so that they're not going to soak up a lot of the water from the plaster. If it soaks up too much of the water from the plaster, then you're actually going to lose all that water and your plaster is going to wind up way too thick. All right, we got those good and soaked.
We might have to make up a little more plaster. I just don't know yet. We'll see how this goes.
Gabriel and Sophie are excited to see you, or Sophia are excited to see you and say hi to Buddy.
Good. Well, hello. Good to see you too. Well, I can kind of see you.
Craig's making jokes about your age. He says an old fossil's going to tell us about old fossils.
Well, you got that right. I won't argue. All right. I'm going to mix up a little bit more plaster, Roger.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and get this out.
So that's the trick. We never know exactly how much we're going to need.
Yeah, just pour me
Get
some
a
more in
little
there.
bit more in there.
Yeah, because I need that to soak up the
That's
burlap.
gonna, yep, if we don't get enough to cover the burlap, it won't get a good wrap.
Yep.
So this is kind of a bit of science and mixing all these things together, but an art of figuring out how much you need and how much to use and how to get all these pieces to bind together.
Yep.
So when we think about finding fossils, the fossils that we typically find are the hard, bony parts of the animals. Sometimes we'll find things like skin impressions and other things, but the majority are the hard, bony parts. And so when you've been out in Montana before, you're looking for, you'll be walking along a ridge line, for example, and you'll be looking for where the rain has eroded down this face of this cliff, and you might see a little odd thing poking out the side of the cliff. And you'd say, I wonder if that's a rock or that's a fossil, if that's a bone that's been fossilized or if that's just a chunk of rock. So what are some of the things you might look for as you're walking along?
We look for what we call floaters, and that'd be bits and pieces of the fossil that will break up, and rain and snow and weather and stuff will wash it down on the side of a cliff, and you see this and you pick it up and say, well, this looks like it's a bone.
So if you're walking along the side of a cliff and you see these things that have rolled down the hillside, you'd grab that and you'd assume there's probably a source for it straight up the hill from there somewhere.
Yep. I know one place right now where there's a femur of a triceratops, but it's way up on a hill, and it's steep.
Steep
mean,
hills.
it's a cliff. You don't want to fall off this.
Yes.
So I doubt if we'll ever get it. I mean, you'd have to have major equipment and stuff to get
So
up
maybe
there.
you'd have to anchor from the top and rappel down, and then you're sitting there in that cradle for hours trying to.
And you don't know if
that.
there's any more in that bone. It just might be a piece of bone, and maybe the whole thing's
It
back
might
there.
go in 6 inches, or you might find the whole leg all the way back to the hip.
That's stuff you just don't know till you're actually doing it.
So there's a big word we can throw in. When we find fossils, most of the time the fossils that we find are little bits of bone scattered here and there. Sometimes we'll find a whole leg bone or a whole spike bone like this. When we find an entire skeleton connected together, that's extremely rare. And we call that articulated, so they're connected together. So if you find an articulated skeleton, that's a very rare find.
In fact, if you can find, usually you find bits and pieces of fossils. Rarely do you find
the whole thing.
But if you find 70% of one side of the animal, that's called a complete find. 70% of one side.
Because we're never really going to find the whole critter buried there. And then what we do is we call that compositing. So if we have 20 different Stegosaurus skeletons that we've found all over the world, and we've got the left leg from this one and the right leg from that one and the hip bone from this one and all the different pieces from all of them, we kind of put them together, and that's the work that the paleontologists do of assembling those things in making a composite of that. So we have a fossil here at the museum that some of you may have seen. His name is Ebenezer. He's an Allosaurus fragilis, and we only have part of his skeleton, and the rest of it has been made as a composite from other allosaur fossils that we found, and we use computer models to generate the size of the bones compared to the hip bone that we found from him and the femur and all of those pieces.
I was in on that site. I helped get that dinosaur out of the ground. Did you know that?
Yes. That one was over in western Colorado, northwestern Colorado.
Yep. Well, what I'm doing right now is to get this out of the field, we'd have to carry this out. And so even though I have the burlap on it and stuff, it's going to be pretty strong. But if it's even bigger fossil, this is really important. So we take sticks and wood and stuff and to strengthen that up even more. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, so that fossil might be very, very fragile. So rather than being a intact bone that I can just hammer out of the ground and lift it right up, if I lifted one end of it, it might just crumble into pieces. And so we're going to make sure that we stabilize it very carefully and then take the time out in the field to do all of these things right. Because if you mess it up in the field, you get it back to the lab and you've just got a little pile of flour to deal with.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen.
So now you're going to cross those burlap straps back over those sticks.
Yep. And when this plaster sets up, I don't know if it'll set up in the time we've got to do this program, but if I be out in the field in Montana, a lot of times when we're digging these, it's really hot.
Yes.
And it will set up before you want it to.
Yep.
But it's kind of cooler in this room, and we have a lot of humidity today, so it's probably going to take a little while for it to set up.
All right.
I know we did a workshop here, Roger, and I showed showing boys and girls how to do this, and in the workshop, it set up before they ever got it onto this. So,
yeah, that can be the challenge with those things.
yeah.
All right, I'm scrolling through the comments, looking for questions. Here we go from Wendy's daughter, I believe. How do you determine the age of the fossil? So when we think about fossils, this is again where our worldview is going to come into play. We would understand a fossil like this stegosaur fossil based on the rock layers that it's buried in, likely died during Noah's flood and was buried at that time. And so from a biblical perspective, we would put that at about 4,300 years ago. So we think these fossils, like this stegosaur fossil, are thousands of years old. From an evolutionary perspective, they'd look at the different rock layers and use different dating techniques, and they would say this fossil is probably somewhere around 80 million years old.
Yeah.
That's a lot of zeros and a lot of difference.
Yeah.
But the basic idea is we look at the rock layer that it's buried in and use that as an indicator. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then too, I think a big thing that argues against them being millions of years old is when you find soft tissue and stuff like that in dinosaur bone. Mm-hmm. And they find that a lot these days. They didn't used to look for it because they just assumed it couldn't be.
Yeah.
And when they found the first one, they thought, well, maybe we ought to look at some more bones. And the more bones they look at, say, good grief,
yeah.
there's more soft tissue that's...
And that actually happened because they were trying to extract a T-Rex femur, I believe it was, and it was so big they couldn't get it out of the field, so they decided in the field to crack it in half and take it back to the lab to study it in two pieces. And once they looked inside, they were really surprised because it hadn't all turned into rock. And if that thing had been in the ground for over 70 million years, you think there would have been enough time for it to turn totally into rock. But they actually found soft tissue, like blood vessels and those types of things, inside of this 80 million year old supposedly leg. And so that's just more confirmation that these things were actually not that old. Only a few thousand years makes a lot more sense to get those soft tissues.
It should be hands down, I would think, that it can't possibly be as old as what they say. Even in 1 million, if it was even 1 million years old, it ought to have time to fossilize or rot.
Yeah.
It ought to do one or two.
And they looked at it under a microscope and found super intricate details in all those cells and things.
They did. Hey, I've got this done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So explain then what we would do as we wanted to get this thing out of the field.
All right. Well, first we're going to wait for it to turn real hard, and when it turns real hard, we'd go ahead and get underneath this here, keep our tools, and we'd start digging underneath this, and we might. I got some here to show you what how we do that. That's already been done that I've done earlier than that, and we'd turn it over, and then we'd carry it out. Now, sometimes you'd actually do even a plaster cast on the other side of it.
Yeah, if it was real fragile, then you could tell it was going to fall apart.
Most times you wouldn't have to do that, but there's times you would.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to take these gloves
Take those off, throw them in here. We'll get all this out of the way and move some other stuff up here. You made quite a mess today.
I know it.
I tell the kids all the time, it's fun to make messes as long as we help clean them up.
Yep.
Just throw those in there. We'll take care of that later.
Okay. Let me have the paper towels here.
All right.
Still got a little bit on my fingers.
Isabella, who's 12, asks if we have any real fossils. So the one that we were just looking at there is a cast that's been made from a real fossil, but it isn't actually a fossil.
There's some real fossils right over here.
Let's pull some of those up here.
Okay.
I'm going to slide this over here.
All right.
We'll let that dry. Maybe we'll get to use that later in another episode. So if you want to bring the other big bone over here, I'll bring this one up. Set that plaster back there.
What do we got here?
That's Claude. I guess he's not a fossil. We probably better move him out of the way.
Well, hello, Claude.
real fossils. These are actually real fossils except for one of these, or two of these, I guess. I wonder if the kids could tell which one's not a real fossil. So this looks to me like a long bone off of something. It's got a hollow cavity here. I can see the little pores inside the bone. So this has been fossilized very well. It's definitely turned into rock. It's very hard and stable. So I'd guess that's probably off of a mastodon or something?
That's a mastodon, that's
Okay.
right. Come from Alaska.
All right. What are the other things you've got here?
Okay, this is from Alaska as well. This right here is the one that is not. And this is from an elk. But you know, it's fun. If boys and girls want to have fun, you can find like deer jaws or something. Practice doing this with a deer jaw or something that you'd find. You carry your plaster out, and you can do everything that I just showed you to do here on something like this, and this makes great practice.
Do a practice excavation
Yep.
where you're not going to worry about damaging a very valuable or rare
Yep,
fossil.
that's right.
Okay.
So that's what we do.
That one's a real bone. That one has not been fossilized.
This is a cast, or this is a copy of a raptor claw. Okay.
So you can see how it's got all these little cracks and chips missing out of it. We rarely find one that's totally complete.
No, you
And then again, this would probably have that keratin sheath over the outside that didn't fossilize.
So it'd probably be this much longer at least if you had all that keratin that would be on it. That cool? All right.
This looks like it might be a piece of a tree trunk.
Yeah, that's a plant. Yeah.
Okay, so this, you can see the ribs running along here. That's fossilized plant material. And I'm not sure exactly
So
what
fossils
species.
come in all kinds.
Yep.
It's just
so
not
there's a
animals.
fossilized plant, a living thing.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got an example of one that you've already cast with the plaster, and it's jacketed and it's ready to remove out of the soil. So let's go ahead and go through that
Okay,
process.
so what we would do now is we'd really be working under this here. It takes time to do this until we get this ready where we can turn it over. We get it right where we think we're under it there.
Now you're
Keep
kind of
working.
cheating because you've got nice loose soil. We
Yeah,
probably wouldn't
it's not
find
that
in
nice
the
in the
field.
field. Yeah, it takes a lot longer than what I'm doing right now. But we just wanted to show you how this is done. So I'm going to turn it over and see what we got here. And this is a leg bone off of a mastodon. You can see it right here. So we'd take this back to the lab, and then we'd use tools like this right here to work all around this. Just like we'd be out in the field, now we're in the lab now. We'd be using all types of tools. Sometimes we have drills, little tiny drills like with Dremel tools and things like that to take some of the debris off of it.
Or like the picks that a dentist would use to clean your teeth.
I have a whole bunch of picks
Yeah.
that dentists have given me that,
Yeah.
that I use. Yep. Okay.
So then we'd examine the bone. We could look at things. Now here's a question from Nathan, who's 10. He asked, can you tell how big or how old the dinosaur was from the spike or from the bone and those types of things?
You can tell if it's a mature animal sometimes.
Yeah.
And the way that they try to guess how old the animal would be, sometimes you can do a cross section. You cut inside of the bone, and it has rings inside of the bone. And it'd be like you're counting the rings on a tree. Don't give you an exact estimate, but you're in the ballpark of how old that creature would be.
So that's the work of a paleontologist. They would go in and study those things and try and estimate.
And it surprises a lot of folks, like the T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, as big as he'd get. One of the oldest ones that they think they found is less than 30 years old.
Yeah, somewhere around 30 years old.
Yeah.
So they would grow very quickly as juveniles, we
Yes,
think, and then
yes.
they'd slow down after that, like
That's
we see
right.
with a lot of reptiles
Yeah.
today.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's important to know that when you find these bones, you hear from the cradle to the grave that they're millions and millions of years old. But we like to make the point, dinosaur, when you find fossils like this in the field, they don't come with the tag on them that
They
says they're
don't.
millions of years old. All you find are the bones, but the rocks that you find these bones in screams out that there is a worldwide flood, because almost all fossils are found in sedimentary type rocks, and that's a type of rock that's laid down by sand-melted water. If there was a worldwide flood that happened all over the world, not just locally, all over the world, you'd expect to find all kinds of plants and animals buried inside of rocks that were made out of sand, mud, and water. And that's exactly what you do find. So the fossil record screams out that God judged this world because of sin.
It's almost like we would expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth.
I've heard that before. I've heard that.
That's one of Buddy's songs, one of my favorites. Okay,
I'm going to see if I can lift this out.
All right, so now we'd be back in the lab and we'd try to extract it from the plaster without damaging the bone.
Yep. Here it comes.
Give it a little wiggle, pull it out of there.
There, we've got it.
And this would probably still be packed full of soil and rock and other things.
Yep,
and you'd have to clean all of that and extract it.
We'd clean all that out, and it'd take a while to do all that. And then you put on, you can see we got a coating on this. We put on like a glue that helps to stabilize this.
Yes.
And it's a.
Otherwise, this little surface would probably just be flaking off in little bits everywhere.
It's called Paleo Bond, is what it's called, and you pick that up and you just paint it on with a brush, and that helps to protect the fossil. Okay.
All right. Joyce is asking, in what part of Montana have you found the fossils?
We go into eastern Montana is where we do a lot of our digs, and it's a real good place. A lot of paleontologists from all over the world come to this area, try to find dinosaurs. That'd be what they call the Cretaceous.
Yep,
the Cretaceous
in those
dinosaurs.
layers.
Yeah.
So the areas around Montana into Wyoming, down into northern Utah and Colorado, those are kind of in the United States. Those are where we find the big dinosaur bone beds and things.
Yeah. I love doing it. So people say, you know, I got to be honest with you, it is a lot of fun doing this. But I tell people jokingly, I said it's a lot of fun for about the first 20 minutes. And then after that turns into a lot of work.
Yeah, so you've been on digs. We've worked with the Dinosaur Center there in Glendive, Montana. And we've taken groups of people out there and actually done digs with supporters of the ministry. I don't think we have any of those things planned for this year, but that's something that we've done in the past. So ways that we want to get you out and actually doing science in the field. We've done other things with Dr. Snelling up at Caesar Creek, which is a place where they've dug a big spillway for a dam, and we can go up there and find trilobites and bryozoans and all kinds of different fun fossils up there.
Yeah, that's right.
What's this one you've got here?
All right, this is I wanted to do this one here because I just love these critters. This is from a saber-toothed cat.
All right. Let's move that out a little bit closer to the end, just so the camera can get in there tighter.
See if I can get underneath this and get it out. I don't know myself because it's the first time I've turned this over to see what. There we go. There's a tooth. Is that cool or what?
All right. So this is a Smilodon tooth. So his tooth would actually have been bedded in. You can kind of see where the color changes right there. That would have been bedded into the jaw back here, and most of this would have been the exposed part. So this is the root down here.
That's right, this is root. This is about all you'd see out of his mouth right here, but that's a pretty big canine tooth.
I think that'd probably be pretty intimidating anyway. It doesn't quite fit your face.
Oh, wow, okay.
All right, Melissa's asking, were there dinosaurs on the ark?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we think about God commanded 2 of every land-dwelling, air-breathing critter to come to Noah, and he took them on the ark to save them so that they would be afterwards. So we believe that the Bible would be clear that there were dinosaurs on the ark.
People ask me, why doesn't the Bible then say there are dinosaurs? That's because the word dinosaur wasn't invented yet. The word dinosaur is a brand new word invented in 1841 by a man by the name of Sir Richard Owen. So what year was the word dinosaur invented in? 1841. And Sir Richard Owen is the guy who thought up the word dinosaur. So that's why you can't find the word dinosaur in the Bible. But the Bible talks about a creature that certainly fits the description of what we call dinosaurs today, and what would that be?
Things like the behemoth, and even Leviathan wouldn't have been a land dinosaur, but some type of what we think of a dinosaur-like creature.
Yeah, behemoth. And then the dragon legends.
Yes.
The dragon legends fit in very well with what we call dinosaurs today.
Yeah, we find those things all over the world. So if we think about a Bible like the King James Version that was written in 1611, why would it use the word dinosaur if that wasn't invented until 1841?
That's right.
And then with more modern versions, there's been a lot of influence from evolutionary thinking. And so if the evolutionary thinking has even impacted people in the church, which is a sad fact, then they wouldn't use that word in their Bible translations. Okay, let's see if I can find one more fun question here. David's asking, how many soft tissue bones do we know that have been discovered? I don't know the exact number, but hundreds and hundreds. And it's everything down from little tiny fossilized salamanders and things with very thin bones, which you would think would fossilize in a very short time. Mm-hmm. They still have soft tissues, up to the giant T-Rex and other things that we found. So this is a very well-known phenomenon.
It is.
Lots of creation scientists are trying to understand this more and study it more.
Yeah, I just think it's so exciting. And you know something else, and this hasn't nothing to do with fossils, but it shows that I don't believe these creatures are millions of years old, are pictographs and petroglyphs that people would draw of dinosaurs. How did they know how to draw them years ago on some of these old cave drawings and stuff, unless they or their ancestors would have actually seen these animals?
Yes, absolutely.
So that tells me that they've seen, or at least their ancestors have seen these animals, and they left records of them by doing paintings and carvings on stones and on canyon walls and such.
And we even have written records of critters that sound like they would have been dinosaurs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, well, we are so glad you guys got to join us today, and thank you, Buddy, for coming down and teaching us all about these things. And maybe one day you'll get to go on one of these fossil digs and actually do some of these things out in the field. Get all hot and sweaty and dirty and muddy and stinky. You won't have a shower for a few days. It's really fun.
Oh yeah, it's fun.
But it really is exciting to be able to work on some of these things and find them. All right, I want to point you guys to this great resource from Buddy. This is his video called I Dig Dinosaurs, and he'll actually take you out to some of those places in Montana, and he'll show you where he's found some fossils and other people working. You'll get to see what some of those things look like. And you'll be doing some concerts and other workshops in our live streams and things for the next few days.
Yep.
All right. So I want to remind you, we've got those things coming up and continuing through the rest of this week. And we're going to be switching things up a little bit next week, going to only a Tuesday and Thursday broadcast for this, and then a Friday hands-on. So we'll be launching, now I just forgot the name, Unlocking Science is the new name of the program. We'll be launching that next Tuesday, so keep an eye out for that, and also for the platform we're launching. So until then, get out and explore all God has made in His amazing creation.